confronted with a believer who's just plain wrong. Now what? Let's talk about it on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
And we are so glad you're here. I'm Steve. I lost my train of thought there. I couldn't remember my name. I was thinking I got a letter.
Was that cruel?
I got a letter this morning, and I was trying to picture it in my mind. I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Eric Guzman is with us. Eric's a pacifist, but he would do fine in a fight because he knows karate.
Aikido, actually, which probably
two other words.
would be less effective than karate.
Would you, given that we don't have a guest, like to delineate the difference between karate and Aikido?
Aikido.
Aikido.
I think Aikido's a
Aikido's
dog.
Yeah, I think so.
Aikido. That's wrestling
You know,
with a
whatever
dog.
whatever you want. You know, my motto around you is let the Wookiee win.
And Matthew Porter's here. Matthew would also do okay in a fight because he knows Eric.
Yes.
I love what you say about pacifism. I'm a pacifist, but I carry a gun just in case I change my mind.
Options.
Is, Matthew, in at least one incident in a bar that had a fighting ring, knocked a big bruiser out.
Yeah, I know.
Do you remember that?
I do. Matt's like, I need to have so many different experiences as a writer, so I have a lot to draw from. And so he actually signed up for a fight and got in the ring and beat the guy.
In one punch.
He's he's a regular Hemingway.
I retired with a 1-0 record. We're
I
good.
remember
So
that.
how old was the kid?
No, he was a big guy. And we set up a comedy bit with Matthew's mom, who I saw 2 or 3 weeks ago, and told her that was the funniest bit we ever did. She called us up. It was in the morning talk show we used to give, and just ate us alive for allowing her son to go into that fighting ring in a bar, no less.
That's awesome.
But you did knock him out.
Yeah, take it up with God. He's sovereign. It's not my problem.
He was predestined to happen.
He was predestined to kick butt.
It was not done by me. It was done through me.
I love how these guys demolish someone else and thank Jesus. I'd just like to thank the Lord for helping me kick this guy's butt.
And we're all about sound doctrine here. That has been proven, obviously, in this discussion. But it's our producer, Jinx, who takes care of the sound part.
Ah, that's a great line. That's a good
That
line.
was a good one, Matthew.
Oh, the turn of the phrase.
Retire again.
So he's here working hard in the little glass booth. And Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. Last Saturday was the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. I wonder what would have happened had George been the president of NASA back then. You know, fellows, he would say, we could save a lot of money on this whole moon landing thing and just film it on a soundstage.
Wait, that's not what happened?
That's right. I mean, we should do a show on that. I think there's a good argument for it never happened.
bet we
Did
get
you see
100
the
guests.
guy? It's been a while, but did you see the guy that approached Buzz Aldrin that time outside of a hotel and called him a liar and said that it never happened, the moon landings never happened, and Aldrin tried to avoid him. I mean, he kept moving around and everything, and finally he just decked him.
Nice.
Just decked
One
him.
shot.
And then that guy
One
was seeing
shot.
stars.
Yep, exactly.
I mean, there's got to be a way to set up a telescope and look at the flag on the moon. I mean, let's just end it.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. If you can look into the vast
We got
reaches
6
of the
rovers
galaxy.
on Mars.
Yeah, I mean, right.
Send one to the moon.
That's sick.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it is, man. You're going to rob all these people of their jobs. Their
Yeah.
children won't have anything to eat.
They'll have nothing to talk about on Twitter.
They'll have no medical insurance, and it's all because of your idea. Kathy is the soft, feminine side of the program, but she can be tough. She beats eggs and whipped cream.
Last week I beat up Oreo cookies. What is the deal
You
here?
crush them. You crush their spirits.
We're showing your violent side, Kathy.
I
something new?
thought we were going to have a funeral director on the program.
Oh,
today.
would you let that go, please?
I
we
can
were gonna
hardly wait to talk to a funeral director.
You're not going to be here when we do that.
That's
We thought it would be a little.
pretty scary,
No,
man.
no. We thought it would be a little too close for comfort. So we're gonna.
No, just plan that show for after.
Yeah.
Stop. That's terrible.
We'll have a viewing.
Which is
Now that we're doing video, we can
That's
do
right.
that.
Prop you up in the corner.
I've always thought
Weekend with Stevie.
Or lay him out on the table.
Exactly, like a weekend at Bernie's thing. I think we could get years of mileage out of an embalmed Steve.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
the funniest movie I've ever seen in my whole life.
Till
Really
we get
is.
the hologram.
Yeah. Well, funny. I'm glad that you approve
All
of the
right.
idea, Steve.
I don't want to talk about this anymore.
You brought it up.
I know, but I regret and repent for having done so. See, we really don't have a guest, and sometimes we do that and just sit around and talk. Now, we could kid around for the entire hour, but there is a serious side to this program. And after much discussion and prayer and fasting, we have decided on a subject. I just forget what it was.
Your name is Steve.
My name is Steve.
The letter is written to you.
Yeah, right. A few months ago was in a debate with Tony Campolo. I love him, by the way. I think he's the real deal. Tony, shortly before that debate, which had been scheduled for a year or two, it was at a Florida hospital event here in Orlando, and we used to do a television program in which we debated all kinds of issues. Obviously, I was the conservative, and Tony was the liberal. We're both bald, and he said we could put our heads together and moon America on the network. Now, I wouldn't say something like that, but Tony is given to those kinds of comments. At any rate, he called me not long before the debate, and shortly before that, he had changed his views on gay marriage. For years, Tony has opposed gay marriage. He's done it with gentleness and kindness and love, and even opposed that at a gay lesbian convention, and was so loving about it and so tearful when he said it that he got a standing ovation. Well, all of a sudden, Tony changes his views, and a lot of people, I suppose, who had been his friends for a lot of years, didn't want to be his friend anymore. So he called me, and he said, Steve, I would understand if you don't want to do this debate. And I'd still love you and would still be our friends, but I would understand if you want to cancel it. And I said, Tony, you're a fruitcake. You're my friend. I'm not going to cancel this debate. I never agreed with any of your wacko views. And this is just another one. I love you, man. I'm going to show for the debate, and I'm going to tell the world that you're my friend. And he got emotional. I passed the phone to his wife, Peggy, and I said, Peggy, how you guys doing? And she said, oh, we're going to be all right as long as we have some friends like you. Well, evidently, there were fewer friends like me than they expected. And some months later, this week, in fact, I got a letter from Tony that was kind of a mass letter to a lot of people saying, I know I've disappointed you, but I think I'm right. And he went on to talk about his own views, and he said he was sorry to have disappointed them, and he hoped they could still be his friend, et cetera, et cetera.
And send money.
Hmm?
And send money.
And said, no, he didn't. Yeah, right.
That's our line.
And so, and I thought, I'm not answering formally. Well, and then I thought, yeah, I am. So I wrote him back, and I said, Tony, as I told you, you're my friend. I love you, admire you. You're the real deal, and you help me be less cynical than I am. And then I said, I suppose they may be right for the wrong reasons. And I suppose that you could be wrong for the right reasons. I want you to know that I'd rather hang out with you than them, and I suspect Jesus might agree with me. At any rate, I want to assure you of my love, and that I will be praying for those who are hassling you that they get the hives. Well, that's the subject. What do you do when you disagree with somebody you think is wrong and they're your brother or your sister in Christ? How do you handle it? Pray for their deaths? Repent? Fast? Pray? Or agree? Thanks for joining us on Steve Brown, etc. And if you think this show sounds crazy, you ought to see it. Just go to keylife.org and check out the new video version of this program.
You can see my giant head.
And see what the producer's eating.
I hate seeing myself on video. I'm so vain.
I eat something different every show. I'm just seeing if anybody notices.
I noticed that. What are you having today?
This is beef jerky, compliments of our video producer.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah.
There you go.
You certainly didn't share it with us.
I was going to say, you're bringing up for the whole
Is that a
class.
booth thing? It's a booth thing.
He brought enough for this booth.
All right.
Oh, okay. So tossing it to me. Something that you said a couple times in the last segment when you're talking about disagreeing with other believers, but then still not breaking fellowship. You said about Tony Campolo specifically, well, he's the real deal. And then you went on to talk about how you dealt with appearing with him at this debate.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a little bit easier for Tony because, like you said, you have been debating him on TV and on radio for a long time.
Yeah.
People know you don't agree, but you're still in fellowship. So then he comes out, in favor of gay marriage. And this whole idea of being the real deal, in my mind, that's key. Like, what does that mean? And that seems to be the context for not breaking fellowship. And I mean, would you even break fellowship if they weren't the real deal? What does that look like?
Maybe not, but at minimum, the real deal.
Yeah. So what is that you look for that allows you to, continue the conversation and allow that, he could be wrong, you possibly could be wrong, although you don't think so, or you wouldn't have those views. What is that?
Right.
What does that look like?
Matthew, what do you think is the real deal?
I don't know. I think
First, do you agree with the statement
we,
that I was making about Tony?
yeah.
That if you're the real deal, so you're my friend.
I think the question is, if there's an existing friendship, is there some belief that would literally make you go, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm done. I just, there may be beliefs that make me kind of shift my perception of who I thought that person was. But as far as I'm going to turn my back on you or disavow you, I just don't.
Well, maybe it means what are the things you're willing to really argue about rather than give the leeway.
Yeah,
you know?
and
So
that's probably the tougher of the thing is to go, what's worth, I think you're wrong, and I think it's on a level that I would like to challenge you in a loving way on this.
Right. So you say you're a believer, but you don't believe in the divinity of Jesus.
All right.
You know, or you have some skewed view of the Trinity, or some of these foundational things that are part of Richard Pratt's cone of certainty. If you've heard that, there are things that are really tight inside that cone. Like if you take the cross section, these are central to being a Christian.
Right.
But there are other issues that are out on the periphery. And as you move up the cone, you're like, hey, these are the places where we really need to make a stand.
Yeah.
So.
And this is an issue because it's a biblical issue. It's one about which Paul addressed in either the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth letter to the Corinthians. Scholars divide those, and they don't know when he's answering questions and when he's making a statement. But he said to the Corinthians, when I told you to break fellowship, I didn't mean with pagans, or you wouldn't have anything to say to anybody. That's what you're here for, is for them, but to a brother or sister. And I think he was talking about something that's so egregious that you just can't walk publicly with somebody anymore without identifying with it. I broke fellowship with a denomination one time. The whole denomination, man. That's telling a lot of people that they're ugly and their mother dresses them funny because of what I believe Paul said. Paul said there are some things you can't publicly walk with people about, or about which you can't walk, because at that point you're saying things to the world that you don't want to be said.
Okay, so what are those things?
Okay.
According to Paul?
In terms of somebody like Tony, I've walked with him for longer than you've been alive, Eric. And so I know how much he loves Jesus. I know about his authenticity. I know about his walk. I know about his loving concern for the poor. And I know that he loves me, and he knows that I love him. In fact, we did that television program for only one reason. Neither one of us had time to do it. And frankly, if I owned New York and hell, as I've said on previous occasions, I would live in hell and rent New York out. And I went up there every month, sometimes more than that, to go to the network and to sit down with, and Tony didn't have time to do it either, but we both did it because we agreed you had to demonstrate to the world two people who disagree and still love each other.
Well, I think.
Let me say one other thing. The comment that we got more than any other all over the country when we were doing that during that year was, you guys really love each other, don't you? Don't agree on anything, but you love each other.
Well, okay, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and that may be the most important statement that you would make in terms of trying to define, what those core things are, is that, as a believer, you've been given that source of love to pass on to people that, basically are unlovable.
And that gets to what I was going to say. When you say, okay, you get to this point and then you treat them like an unbeliever, according to Paul, well, how do you treat an unbeliever? You love them.
Yeah, right. I hadn't thought about that.
So what's really the deal? You're saying, well, look, I love you. We have some disagreements. Let's talk together about these things. But we're not going to be, say, in the same denomination and sign our, both have our signatures at the bottom of a faith statement.
Yeah.
So there's some lines there. But I think it would probably be helpful to think in terms of something that the listeners encounter regularly. And we hear from a lot of people who have a family member or a friend who they are homosexual and they're going to go get married and there's going to be a marriage ceremony. And people are saying, I can't even go to this thing. And there are going to be huge consequences, ramifications of what that says to the family, what says to that person about your love for them. even if you think that they're, maybe they have an expression of faith, but then they are off base, and so not showing up would tell them, even if they're a non-believer, I'm not loving you. So that's a specific instance where you go, okay, let's talk about how do you even interact on that level, because your actions are saying things, that can be very, very hurtful. And damage those relationships forever.
We will have an answer to that. I don't, but everybody else at this table does.
Yeah, right.
On that particular question when we come back. And it's going to be profound, as if it came from Sinai. It will resolve the division and the hostility that's been so present in the church. So you don't want to miss it. We will come back. Listening to Steve Brown, etc. We, even though we have no guests for this broadcast, we had a dynamite guest last week, and you might want to go to our website and check it out. We spent an hour with our friend Kendra Fletcher, and she is a dynamite lady, has so much good stuff to say. In fact, you ought to go to our website often. It's called keylife.org. And if you go there, you can get some past, etc. programs and a pile of blogs from a pile of sharp people who have important things to say. You can also go to our store, and it comes down to filthy lucre. The only reason we do all that stuff on the website is to get you to the store so you'll buy stuff, right, George?
That's not true. That's not
Key Life koozie.
Listen, we're talking about fellowship with believers when there's strong disagreements, and Eric brought up the thing that Richard Pratt, our friend, used to teach and still does, that there's a cone of certainty. The further you go up the cone, the less important the issues. But at the very center, there is Jesus. Let me, since we're talking about our store, and we're pushing product, and we know it's about product, why don't you go to the store and get Justin Holcomb's book, Know the Heretics. Know the Heretics. That Jinx put that on the big screen.
Right
I just couldn't find it right away.
Are you checking in for drool, Kathy?
Your name is Steve.
Yeah, I got a letter this morning.
Nice callback, Kathy.
But one of the great things about that Justin says, and he says it often, and he works for Key Life, among other things. He kind of heads up our publishing effort. And Justin said, you got to be careful what you call heresy and what's not a heresy. And a lot of things that we are sure reflect heresy aren't heresy at all. For instance, gay marriage is one of those. That may be, if you support it, that you may be wrong. You and I may disagree a lot, but that doesn't make you heretic. The heretic thing generally has to do with Jesus and what people think about him and what has been determined by the church over 2,000 years in that gets outside of the pale, and you're no longer a Christian. Christology is a good place to start. If you believe that Jesus was a good man who said nice and loving things and ought to be listened to, but he's not God, you can be my friend. And, we can have a beer together if I drank beer, or we could go to a movie together, but I can't call you my brother because you have stepped outside of the pale of the cone of certainty. And there are a number of other things like that, too. And I don't think this should become a theological discussion, but it's a good point.
I think the one of the problems that comes into play with this, though, is when you're talking about a situation like with you and Tony, where Tony's on this issue of gay marriage, Tony's on one side and you're on the other side. There is enough respect between the two of you that when you say, "I don't agree with you about this, but you're my brother, and can we continue to walk together?" and he says, "Absolutely, because I love you," etc. Sometimes it's been my experience that with people who are on a different side than where I particularly come down on this issue, if you don't end up totally agreeing with them, then you have a break in the fellowship that was there before, because there isn't, you lose the ability to say it's possible to be friends and to disagree on issues. I know of two specific instances on this issue of homosexuality and gay marriage, etc., where I know that there has been a split in the relationship because of either what's been perceived as my position on it, with never being given the opportunity to say, no, that's not how I feel. I love you. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I love you and I want to maintain a relationship. Or getting involved in having a discussion and then having it cut off almost immediately. Well, see, that's exactly what I just said. You think I'm wrong and I'm bad because I'm this or whatever. And that part of it you can't fix.
No, but you can work at it.
Exactly.
But
only if they want to.
Oh, I know. I mean, there's some problems that aren't fixable. They just aren't. And I suspect that a lot of people that Tony's dealing with, those things are not going to be fixable. And they're not going to be fixable with people people who have walked with Tony for years. And that's kind of sad. But we said love is at the bottom of it. Jesus said that the world would know because of our love for each other. And that's where revival and awakening takes place. So we can't just say, you're ugly and your mother dresses you funny and I can't walk with you anymore, because that goes to the very heart of how Jesus wants us to define ourselves.
When we get back, could we address that invitation to the gay marriage or the ceremony?
Yeah, we'll specifically
from
deal
somebody
with it.
who is a believer and yet holds these views.
That's true. We can do that, and we will when we come back. Listening to Steve Brown, etc. And occasionally we don't have a guest and just sit around and talk. And surprisingly, when we hear from you guys, you say you like those programs. We don't particularly.
And we wonder what's wrong with you.
In fact, somebody said, I'm not going to say who it was, that God was going to be our guest. And then somebody in a semi-blasphemous statement.
But there haven't been any lightning bolts so far. So
yeah, but we're in Florida, man. You can die for stuff like. And somebody said, "But what has he published recently?"
And I would like to say, as a published author, I have one up on Jesus because he never wrote a book.
Yeah, but he wrote in the sand.
I know,
yeah.
he did write in the sand, and he was more effective with that than I have been with my books.
And he was the author.
Yes.
Biblically and theologically.
True.
Of the entire Bible. I just want to remind you of
Thank
that.
you.
And if you don't agree, I can't be your friend anymore, okay?
Yes, I'm a heretic.
No,
I don't believe that.
Somebody should write a book about, how you deal with when you're trying to stand for the truth and state the truth, but not really, and differs with. Oh wait, somebody
to do
did.
it.
Would that be Talk the Walk? How to
Oh,
be
man.
right without
I
being
have been
insufferable?
doing
And you can
radio
get that
in-
at keylife.org.
Oh, it's been interesting. You know what's been interesting is the interviews that I'm doing around the country right now as we speak. In fact, as soon as this program is over, I'm going to be talking with somebody in the Twin Cities about this. And some of the hosts are really angry, uptight, in-your-face Christians.
Awesome.
And
I want to hear all of those
they don't
interviews.
like any of this girly stuff about love, man. They want blood. And the cool thing is, and God arranged this, and I've been so thankful for Him and the way He did it. I really am a conservative. I am so far to the right that you can't go any further, politically, theologically, and socially, which allows me to say things to people who are like me that they need to hear more than anybody else. If I were some kind of wacko liberal like Tony, I wouldn't even be on those interviews. So there you go.
You'd be written off. Okay, so we
So
talked
to speak.
we talked about the fact that you can be a Christian and still think that homosexual marriage or homosexuality is not a sin
Without being a heretic.
without being a heretic.
Yeah.
Now, you could be wrong, but not necessarily
Okay.
a heretic. So somebody's going to get married, somebody in your family who's homosexual. And we hear from a lot of people, and not a heretic, and we hear from a lot of people that really, really struggle with going to the marriage, going to the ceremony because of what it's going to say. So what do you say to somebody in that specific situation when they're in danger of damaging relationships long-term and pretty much severing that ability to even discuss the subject?
We, Pete and I, Pete Allenson, and I answer questions on Fridays on our regular teaching program, Key Life, and we answered a question like that, and we're still spending time answering the people who are angry with what we said. But I think when you bring up that issue, what do you do? I think you just characterized one side of the issue in a very clear way, and in a way with which I agree. I couldn't do the wedding, but I would be there. If it was my son or my daughter or my friend, I'd probably be there for the reasons that you're talking about. But first, it would be very important that in a gentle and loving way, I articulated my position. I couldn't just go and say, yay. I can go and say, yay, I love you, even if we disagree about something this important. And that second part is the part that Christians don't often do if they go to those weddings. Their own position is compromised because they refuse to express their conviction.
So you would universalize that and say
Yeah.
you should do this if you're going to go.
Well, yeah, I think in
You couldn't
some
go
way
without.
you do.
Okay.
In my case, it's pretty generally known how I feel about it, so I don't feel like I have to do that. But yeah, I think you have to do it to the people involved and I think you have to do it with your son who comes in and announces that he's gay.
I think you have to. I think in your case, or anyone else who has the quote, you always throw out, and I'm ordained. But people with the ministerial credentials, I think it's very, very important that you do. And I'm not saying that it's not important for others, but you have to be sure that you say your biblical convictions, like you said, and then say, but I love you, and then go, because there are people watching, and the ramifications from that as someone who is ordained is way more significant than if it's me or if it's Eric or George or Matthew or the guys in there, because nobody is looking to us in the same way that they look to someone with those quote credentials.
I don't like that, but I think that's probably
true.
true.
And I get that, but I think so.
And I think the judgment that we have of each other needs to be you know, when you expressed all of the implications of not being at the wedding in terms of relationships and love and walking with people,
A continuous
all of that.
conversation. Yeah.
But you express it in a very pejorative way. I think there has to be. I agree, by the way. But I think you have to also recognize that there are people who feel brothers and sisters who say, I just can't do it. One of our board members, he ended up going, but up until the day before, he said, I can't do this. I just can't. I know the implications of this, and I know what it's going to cause people. So we have to say that people come down on different places in this particular issue. And
Yeah, I get that.
Well,
you and I agree, which kind of scares the spit out of me.
and
No, I just think you have that direct conversation with the person about where you come from, and then they uninvite you, and the problem takes care of itself.
Otherwise, go get the free food.
Yeah.
There you go.
there does seem like there's, in a sense, too, the kind of taking the long view, because in our culture today, especially in the issue of same-sex attraction, is that, and Eric was making the point earlier, that has become so much a part, the world tells them that's their identity. So if you're rejecting that, it's not just an issue. So if you reject that issue, you're rejecting me. You know,
Yeah.
if I say I'm gay. So in some sense, it's like, you know, you're not going to change their mind by talking to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can suggest that your identity is actually a child of God, made in the image of God, and all the dignity that goes along with that, and which is a difficult conversation, but it is the alternative to identifying yourself as solely, on that issue.
And
Okay, sorry, we're wrapping.
Guys, oh man, we need 3 or 4 hours on this.
I can back the
But
tape.
it comes down to money, so we're going to make a buck and we're going to return. You're listening to Steve Brown, etc., and this hour's gone by fast, and we got to land the plane pretty fast. But Eric, I want to go back, and I want you to repeat it, because I think that is a really, really important issue. George had brought up that people, when you say, I can't agree with you, immediately you have rejected them, and it makes it hard to go from there.
And
So how do
Kathy
you
was
do it?
addressing that too.
Yeah,
I mean, that
Kathy
really
was about her own issue with somebody that she loves and that I love, and that she just can't fix it. Eric, it's important we repeat what you said, so say it again.
Well, I think if you have created that loving atmosphere and you have a relationship with the person, and maybe they already understand, okay, this person might not agree with me. Maybe they're, an ordained minister in a denomination that has said, no way on gay marriage, or they have some clue, right? But it's a good relationship. I think, and those are a lot of kind of caveats, but if you can lovingly say, as my brother or as my sister who thinks that homosexuality isn't a sin, and you believe in marriage, could I'm going to go to the wedding, but could we have a discussion about the fact that when I say I disagree, I'm not rejecting you as a person, and let me tell you why. Now, you might think that. You might think that I'm saying flat out, I reject you. But as my brother or sister, could you think of it in terms of your core identity is not your sexuality? Your core identity is a child of God, made in the image of God, who has inherent dignity and value. You're somebody that Jesus died for. You have this tremendous value. So could we start the conversation from there? Like, we both acknowledge each other as having this status of loved and accepted. And because we're loved and accepted by Jesus, we can love and accept each other. And I think that can start to a shift, at least with this specific issue, and maybe with others as we disagree with Christians.
It's so good.
Yeah, I'm not trying to convince you that I'm right. I'm just trying to convince you that I love you. I think that makes
and that
a world
you're
of
loved
difference.
by God.
Yes,
And this is why, because of our common Christian belief.
And the guideline may become for the listener or whatever, what do you say that gives you the best chance, the best opportunity to say that very thing? How do you interact?
Stoke that atmosphere, stoke that fire of love.
Position yourself there.
Guys, we're not leaving because we're angry or because you don't agree with us or because you're gay or straight. We're leaving because we're out of time. But we're going to do this next week, same time, same place. Hope you'll join us. And between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. That gives you a wide, wide berth.